Welcome to episode 3 of the Music Minds podcast. My name is Tony Fennell, and joining me from sunny Brooklyn, New York, is my co-host, John Stone. How are you, mate?
It's kind of cloudy Brooklyn today, but I'll take the compliment on behalf of my borough.
Well, wonderful. Today's episode is called Free to Be You and Me, or Facts About the Fair Use Scam and How to Protect Your Copyrights. And I can see you rubbing your hands already, John, because I know what you're like. There are a number of misconceptions floating around about fair use, what it means and what the purpose it serves. In this episode, we're going to try and explain how and why the term was introduced. If I can just say, John, in a nutshell, copyright law bestows certain exclusive rights for creators of content. The law says that the copyright holder has exclusive rights to reproduce their work, create derivative works, and perform their work publicly. But of course, there's a caveat. These exclusive rights are not absolute, and the doctrine of fair use creates the go-around. As far as I see it, mate, the purpose of copyright law, and tell me if I'm wrong, is to promote creativity, innovation, and the spread of knowledge. And the law does this by balancing the rights of both the authors, meaning the copyright holders, and users. But as we all know, some people can give two hoots about the law and straight out abuse the system. They don't care. They abuse the law put into place to protect the creator. My question to you, John, is how do I protect myself? And what is behind the phrase fair use scam?
Well, that is a freighted phrase indeed.
Is it loaded? Is that a loaded question?
It's a loaded question, exactly. Look, I'm going to start off by saying I certainly understand the logic behind fair use. I understand that things like parody, it's kind of like you have to have the right to be able to mock the king, the court jester rule, so to speak. And I can understand that in certain regards, absolutely, you shouldn't have to get permission if you want to use a piece of copyrighted work in something for a school project or something that is used for in a non-profit way. And that's another loaded term, non-profit. But to start, I just want to do a little reading off of the Copyright Office's website, which is where they talk about the concept of fair use. And it says that the fair use of a copyrighted work, including such use by reproduction in copies or phonorecords or by any other means specified for purposes such as criticism, this is the important ones, criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright. So you really look at that sentence, and it seems fairly straightforward. When you're talking about criticism, of course, if I want to do like Siskel and Ebert, showing how old we are again, and they want to do a TV show talking about a movie and showing clips from that film, of course you have permission to do that. You're criticizing. Comment, news reporting. If you, let's skip comment for a moment, news reporting in a news show, if you want to show something, of course that makes sense. Teaching in the classroom, of course that makes sense. Scholarship and research, yes, I can see that to a certain extent. You're talking about certain things that come back and say, all right, well, this scholarship, this book is now going to be published and put out there, so you're going to have to get permission at that point. But it's understood that in these limited ways, copyright does not require permission if you want to use it for these types of things. It's when you get into things like comment or scholarship even, or research, you get a little wavy, little uncertain there, because what are you talking about and how are you using that? And so they do try to define it a little bit. And there are other factors that they should be considered, and that is the purpose and character of the use, whether such use is of a commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. Again, there comes that nonprofit. The nature of the work, the amount of the portion of the work that's used, and the effect of the use upon the potential market or value for that original copyrighted work. So it seems fairly straightforward. But there are people who are very invested, for lack of a better term, in trying to expand that. And they somehow believe that this is insufficient and that people should be given more free range to take music and take, particularly because that's what we're talking about, take music and reinvent it, reuse it, sample it, and interpret it, and turn that into something new, and then somehow claim that as their own. And that is really where we are at loggerheads with a lot of people. And there are certain groups and organizations that are very, very invested, again, as I use that term, in expanding this definition of copyright and giving more free range to people to use it. One of those is, of course, an organization called Creative Commons, and they have a very strong belief system that basically says our belief that to ensure the maximum benefits to both culture and the economy in this digital age, there you go. You're getting some real buzzwords there. The scope and shape of copyright law needs to be reviewed. Okay, you know what?
Right. Well, firstly, John, if I could just say, the guy who wrote that is the same guy who's got his coat open. He's got a load of watches saying, "Want to buy a watch? Want to buy a watch?" I mean, I can see the guy who's going, "Hang on a minute, copyright. Forget watches. We're just going to take other people's songs. It's much easier."
Well, and also, you know, one of the people that's very much involved with this is a guy named Lawrence Lessig. He's a professor. He's very much into the expansion of copyright and everything like that. These are like academics in schools, and that's what has always irked me, is that the people who want to have more access and free range are people that aren't dependent upon this music to make a living. They're not dependent upon these things, and you've got some insight in this as well that you've been doing some research on, Tony, about people who take samples and people who remix and do these things. And I don't understand where the scholarship is in that, the criticism, the commentary, all these things that are in the law that basically say this is what it's about. If you're going to take a sample of music or you're going to somehow remix something and put it out there, and in the environment, as we've talked about with social media and such, you can put something out there, it can become viral, and all of a sudden you're making money off of that. Well, wait a minute, how is that now fair? You know?
Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, I would say more than ever now, John, it's crucial for any modern musician to have a basic knowledge of music copyright law. I mean, at least to be able to grasp the legal avenues. If you're using another artist's material, whether you're covering it or sampling it, you're going to get into trouble if you haven't taken the right channels. You know, James Brown, Kraftwerk, these guys, they're lawyers, not them personally, but their lawyers rolled up their sleeves and they went, we're going after you and we're going to win. And they did. I mean, this is what you do for a living. You go and you find this stuff. I mean, have you run into this in your real job?
Well, it's interesting because we get now certainly sampling, if we just want to use that as an example.
Yeah.
Sampling now is whenever you're dealing, obviously, with another commercial entity, meaning another record label or a known artist, they come and they do due diligence and they make sure anything that's used. And I've actually seen things where somebody says, "Oh, well, we're using a piece of this." I listen to the track that they send. I can't identify it. And I'm like, wow, what were you thinking that this was part of it or something? It's like, well, maybe it's in that vague sort of little sound in the background, but it's gone to such the opposite extreme in certain cases, especially when you're dealing again with another label or another publisher or something, that they want to make sure it's locked down. And look, if you are using a sample or you are using a piece of music and reinterpreting it, but it's still understood and you can still hear it and recognize it, then you can, as the original copyright owner, you can negotiate your own deals. And I always find it really funny because in so many of these cases I've seen, and we've had a few of them with my day job, we've had a few of them where it's come in and the piece of music that they're using is so not relevant. It's not a relevant piece of the actual, it's just something off a recording. I'm like, why didn't you just you could have done those chords and no one would ever have known. But, you know, it's like, well, we wanted to have that original feel or whatever, you know. So,
well, talking about that original feel, let me throw this at you. And you and I were talking about this over dinner at one. So, you know what? It wasn't over dinner. It was over drinks. Who am I trying to kid? But I remember talking to you and I walked in and I said, "Have you heard the news?" And you were like, "Well, what's that?" And I went, "Richard Ashcroft from The Verve just got Bittersweet Symphony back."
Right.
You know, this is after Jagger and Richards shut him down and took 99% of that song. And that is, it's a killer song. And it's back to what you just said. Why not just re-record those chords, just jag him around a little bit or use a guitar version of it? No, they used it wasn't actually the Stones per se, but it was, I've forgotten which song it is. That's terrible of me, isn't it? But
yeah, I'm trying to remember too.
but even the mere fact that they took the sample from the Stones song and the guys went after it, at the time I thought that's really harsh. But then you've got Jagger and Richards handing it back to him. And I remember you saying, "Oh boy, now that's going to cause a lot of trouble." Can you explain to me and the listening audience what you meant by that? Because it was interesting to me. I thought, what a nice thing to do, and you were like, "Well, it's far more reaching than that, Tony."
It's precedent setting, as they like to say. And I think the essence of that, and I'm sure, the original publisher and such, when they went after the Verve in the beginning, they were being punitive, to say the least. Remember, this was back at the time when there was a lot of sampling going on. There were a lot of these things coming and going. So it was almost in a sense, I want to, make a statement here. I want to make sure that people are going to understand that if we're going to, someone's going to do something like this, we are going to defend our rights to the maximum we can. And to what you were just saying, whether it was, the actual recording, whether it was an actual, absolute piece, it was enough that people could recognize it. And the same thing, look, we're not even just talking about somebody current like the Verve, or they're not that current anymore. Remember now, Led Zeppelin has had to deal with that. They were pulling music from old blues tracks and thinking, it's just an old blues song. And next thing you know, the estate of somebody or another is like, wait a minute, you can't do that. Now all of a sudden, some of their biggest songs, not some of their biggest ones, but definitely some recognizable songs of theirs, have somebody else on there as a writer because they didn't give them credit. So it's the idea, what is it of that piece? If we use the example of Bittersweet Symphony, what is it of that piece?
Actually, the Stones song was The Last Time, by the way.
The Last Time, thank you, very good. So what is it of that makes it so critical to your piece of music? And I think it's something that people recognize. It's something that, and we've had this played on us where someone says, well, it's such because the company I work for, we have some really super famous songs. It's like, well, it's so famous that it should just be like part of the, the zeitgeist. It's like, it's so well known that it shouldn't be subject to copyright anymore because it's become so big and so woven into the fabric of, our society and such that you by you still having control of it, you're denying people the right to even, enjoy it and exploit it and do whatever, which of course, again, I say poo-poo to that,
Absolutely.
But, something like that, The Last Time, it was critical to the creation of this new piece of music. And you can make that. We also talked about Blurred Lines.
Blurred Lines, that was a landmark case. And, Marvin's estate sued Robin Thicke and Pharrell. He was in there, right? But, the same estate went after Ed Sheeran.
Yep.
And Ed Sheeran has had hit after hit after hit.
Yep.
People aren't letting, no one gets away with anything. Literally they'll go, those four chords are similar too, we're coming after you. And there is the problem I had with it, John, and I love myself a bit of soul. I love soul music. I adore Marvin Gaye. But there are certain songs, it's a lilt, and I'll use it as that, and that's the word I'm going to use, because I've done that. There's only a certain amount of chords, and soul, you're not using basic A, Gs, and Bs. There's certain soul songs that have certain chords, and you can't help but vacillate towards them.
Sure.
Ed Sheeran does, he does absolutely drop a hat to a lot of soul songs, but, there does come a point where it's like, is he ripping it off, or is he just doing a sound alike? And I hate to use that term, but
right.
To me, the fair use scam becomes very weird when it becomes cover songs. I explain that to me, because that is bizarre. It's absolutely, definitely not fair use, surely.
Sure. A straight cover is basically a song that has been written, it's been published, it's been out there. You're taking it, you're doing your own version of it and such. You got to get that. Now, you have the right to do that as soon as you get yourself a mechanical license. Then you can basically release that new recording of that song, your version of it. But the rights to the original song still are retained by the original songwriter and their publisher, etc. Right now, and we want to make clear to everybody, we're talking about primarily United States law.
Yes.
So this is when we talk about copyright law, etc. We're talking about United States law. There are different laws all around the world, and here's a perfect example. If you have an English song, something done in the UK, something done in the United States, whatnot, and someone in France wants to make a French version of it, copyright law in France gives them a right to cut into the copyright.
Wow.
All right. So if you do a French version of Blue Suede Shoes, okay, you as the French author, the author of the French lyric, it's a derivative, but they give you cut in, as it's called, and you get a piece of that. And it's not just in France, there are other territories too. So it's very, and therefore you can collect a little royalty on that. You can get something. You didn't have anything to do with the creation of the song, but you wrote something to make it accessible to that audience, to that market. Boom, you get your piece. So we're talking about U.S. copyright law and fair use, but it can really change all around the world, and copyright in general is fractured in that regard. And to that extent, I could agree, yes, if we could come up with some sort of global standard, that would be terrific. Yeah. There are certain territories where they can, try and get their fingers in there, get their finger in the pie, so to speak, and get their little bit. So it's very, again, and we talked about this from the beginning in our first episode, copyright needs to be defended at all times, meaning you, as the owner of the rights, are constantly being challenged for your ownership of your output, of your music, of your rights. It's not just in this. I don't know if you saw this one, Tony, but there was a case where a photographer had one of their photographs used by Andy Warhol in one of his paintings, one of his lithographs or whatever they are of a famous person. And it was clearly that photograph, and they sued the estate, and a judge just said, no, it's been transformed enough into something new that it's now a unique piece of art, even if the underlying image is someone else's copyright. Now, again, who could argue? I mean, who could argue that, or who could argue against that? It comes down to the opinion of someone in the court, and so many of these fair use cases, if it's big enough and there's enough money involved, wind up in the court, and it depends on what judge you get, or it depends on what the circumstances are. That somebody may be friendly to copyright, somebody may be friendly to fair use, and you wind up getting a judgment, and then you have to spend more money to try and appeal and all of that. So it really is. It's a tough row to hoe, especially,
It's interesting, though, John, because, I mean, you and I are from an era, as well a lot of our listeners will be. I can remember the Vanilla Ice situation, Ice Baby, where he went, and they went, well, it sounds a bit like Queen. And he was like, sounds a bit like Queen. Mine goes, dun, 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 dun. And they're like, yeah. And then he goes, and theirs goes, dun, 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 dun. I was like, is this guy insane? Hence, he's not in he's selling houses now. And I think he's found his vocation. But, but right there, it was just, oh my word. It's crazy. And I think it has got so skewed over the years, this whole fair use definition. There has to be some kind of uniformity with regards to what it actually means. Is there? Right. I mean, I know you've just said France's copyright laws are different to the United States and the UK, but this fair use thing, it really is. It's a license to say, oh, we can do what we want. Surely.
Well, again, if you can get away with it, get away with it. I saw this on the subway a while back. It was for one of these websites that freelancers can be involved in. It says, do first, apologize later. And I'm like, ugh, boy, there's a theory, right? And isn't that in essence of what today is? Or now it's do first and don't apologize,
Right. That sounds like Harvey Weinstein to me. But
exactly.
That's another show.
Defend. Exactly. So the point there is, when it comes to this type of thing, you see again the language is very, very plain and straightforward. There really shouldn't be a whole lot of interpretation there necessary, but it is. And, people can take that and run with it. And again, I'm sure, look, you're talking about Robin Thicke, right?
Yes.
With Blurred Lines. There were lawyers all over the place. There were people all over. I mean, somewhere at some point, somebody must have said, ooh, that sounds kind of like something. And someone else said, you know what? Or, no, it doesn't. Or, so what? Or, what? Nobody's going to notice that. Or if they do, we'll defend it. And if at the worst comes to worst, we'll give them a share of it. Look, they've already made their money. Okay, they've made their money. The song was all over the place for about 6 months to a year after the fact, So, I mean, everybody's, getting something out of it. They're still going to retain the master rights to it one way or the other. And you just have to say, okay, well, if you want to defend yourselves, estate of Marvin Gaye, boom, you're going to have to go ahead and do that. And it comes down, I mean, that's why lawyers make so much money. It's because there's always somebody to convince you, do this or don't do that,
That's right. And you will know this better than anyone, well, better than me. The copyright law must be ever evolving. I mean, I don't know how many big changes there have been to the law over the last 10 years, but it's got to be fast moving, John.
Well, and that's we had this conversation in one previous episode as well, because the law creeps forward. Technology has moved forward so quickly and expanding exponentially and such with social media and with technology, with being able to literally sit at a computer and create music and post it, publish it and post it and get it out before somebody can even say, wait a minute, you sampled my song, or you used a melody from my thing, or you used some of my words. So the law kind of stays where it is. It depends on how you interpret it. And I think it's one of the reasons that, they can say, here's something, it tells you what it is, but it's still open to interpretation. And so you now start dealing with cases where somebody came up and said, okay, this was infringement. This was somebody took something that was under copyright and used it for their own purposes, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. And you can get another thing like the Warhol case where they say, oh, well, no, that's been transformed. It's been changed enough so that it really is not, it's not infringing in any way upon the commercial value of the original image. It's its own thing. And how do you, but as I always say, how do you justify doing something on top of something else if that first thing didn't exist? And that's always been my position,
Yeah, you're right. Here's another sort of side of this whole debate. There has to be artists like Vanilla Ice that at the time didn't expect a number one hit. I mean, that song was a huge hit throughout the world, not just the United States. He took that sample and ran with it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he had a hit. Now, I don't know how much he had to pay out to Queen, but I'll pretty much guarantee that they took it all.
It depends. I mean, you can, and again, that was sort of an early case, because that's what we're talking like quite a while ago, when you were still seeing all of these samples being used, these pieces of music that were being interpolated into some other, especially in the rap world. Rap music was being used, rap music was using samples all over the place. That's basically how most of it got started. And again, you go back to what is the quality, and you touched on this a little bit, Tony. It's like, it's not just the notes. It's not just the chords, it's the feel. It's that intangible thing that made that first piece of music a hit in the first place. Yeah. Made that recording, not just the piece of music, but the recording of it, that gave it that quality that people responded to. You're taking that magic, not just the notes and the physical bits and pieces of it. You're taking that magic and putting it into your thing. Why? Because you think that's going to help your song sell. So again, you can't, back to what you were saying about Vanilla Ice and that, sure, but he was coming off of this period of time where everybody was doing whatever they were doing, and consequences be damned. Let's just put some stuff out there because again, the law was too slow, or these companies were too slow to catch up to this stuff, and these pieces of music were just coming out left and right. It's like swatting flies. You're trying to just keep them off the food. But and it's not, again, another example with Steely Dan and Ricky Don't Lose That Number with Song for My Father. They got sued, and boom, okay, we'll give you a piece of credit and you'll get a cut of the copyright on that because of that track at the very beginning. That's almost essentially the same thing as Vanilla Ice, because they were using a very, very well-known bass line, I mean, certainly in the jazz community, and that piece was enough to get you to go, wait a minute, that's somebody else's song. So
well, there's a funny story that apparently Freddie Mercury was sat having breakfast, and he sat there going, he's having his breakfast. All of a sudden, he hears the bass line. And he automatically thinks, here's one of mine, Under Pressure. It turns into Ice Ice Baby, and apparently he's like, what?
Exactly.
I mean, it's truly insane. Look, we could we can go on and on and on, and let's hopefully our audience is going to stick with us, because these are ever evolving. We know that. Before you know, John, a week or so from now, we're going to be talking about somebody else that's in trouble for fair use. So it's going to be trouble. Look, I want to say thanks to our listening audience again. Thanks for listening and spending some time with us. You can find more episodes on how to reach John and I at our website, musicmindspodcast.com, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. John, as always, mate, you're a superstar, and I will see you next time, my friend.
All right, thank you, Tony, and I look forward to the next one.